I'd like to start just by thanking you for inviting me to speak to you today, and also thanking all of you who are giving up a little bit of your Saturday to be here and to think about the importance of play for children. It has been a really, really tough year, and all of you guys who are advocating for children's play and working with children and prioritising play have done such a fantastic job during difficult times. And I do lots of writing and talking, but lots of other people work very hard on the ground doing the doing. So I really respect that. As Margaret said, my background is in children's mental health. So until probably 2-3 years ago, I hadn't really ever thought about children's play in a lot of detail. I was interested in why some children develop anxiety disorders in particular, but mental health problems quite broadly, and thinking about, well, is there something we could be doing earlier in children's lives to try and stop them from getting to the point where they need to come in and see a therapist and have treatment for a mental health problem? It just seems to me that we're kind of failing children a little bit if our solution to mental health is treating the problem when it happens, rather than bringing children up in a world where they thrive and they are mentally healthy, rather than getting to the point where they have problems. And I think kind of through becoming a parent myself and witnessing my children's play and the power that that play has for them, that definitely inspired me a little bit to be thinking about play, and just realizing, as I say, that the answer can't be treatment. It has to be that we're doing something wrong if 1 in 10 children have a mental health problem. And so, I really wanted to think about what's the essence of childhood? What is the thing, when are children most happy? When are they most joyful? And that's when they're playing. So that's brought me to think about play. And I now am fortunate to have some funding from UKRI, which supports me. They pay my salary at the moment, for me to do work on bringing together that sort of science of mental health with children's play. So I'd like to talk to you a bit about that today, thinking about the research, and also, of course, thinking about it within the context of the pandemic, where we're at right now, and how we might use play as we kind of move into, hopefully, a post-COVID world at some point in the not too distant future. So just to give you an overview of what I'm going to talk about, I thought I'd start just by thinking about the benefits of play in general. I'm sure this will just be a refresher for most of you. So thinking about free play, why free play is particularly important, thinking about outdoor play and play in nature and the benefits of that type of play, and also thinking about adventurous play, which is one of the types of play that I'm really interested in. Then briefly just think about where were we at before COVID hit, what was that kind of play landscape at that point. Then thinking about play during the pandemic, how has the pandemic affected children's play? Then thinking about mental health during the pandemic, and eventually getting to the point where we think about what's the role of play post-COVID-19. So free play happens when children decide what they want to do, how they want to do it, when they want to start, when they want to stop, who they want to be involved. So it's entirely led by the children. Okay, you join in as an adult if you're invited to join in and that's part of their plan. But if it is not part of their plan, then you do not. You don't interfere, you just let them get on and play and do whatever they want to do. This type of play is really important for children for lots of reasons. One is that it's really enjoyable, right? Because it's the thing that they've chosen to do, so that it's likely to be something that they enjoy doing. Another is it increases their sense of control because it's led by them. They are controlling that play situation. So if you're working with children who are feeling a total lack of control, allowing them to play in that way allows them just to have a bit of control over part of their life in that moment, whereas at the moment children don't have a lot of control. They're told, schools are open, schools are closed, you're home, you're not, whatever. And so allowing them to play freely just allows them to have a bit of control over something in their life. It can help them to make sense of things, help them to work out what's going on, what does it all mean. And again, if they've got things kind of on their minds and they're allowed to play freely, then they might use their play to help them try and work out what's going on. But if we structure that as adults, then what we're doing is taking the thing that we think is important and putting it on their play, because what they need is a space to express themselves and work out themselves what's going on. And I'll show you some nice examples in a little while of how that has played out in the pandemic. It gives them an opportunity to express themselves. If they're feeling angry, they might build something and break it down. There's nothing wrong with that. Expressing emotions is much better than keeping them inside. And it can also support relationships. So if a child is given that space to play freely and they invite you into that play space and you play with them, but in a way that's led still by them, then that can be really powerful for that relationship, because the child can see that, you know, you're respecting their ideas, you're allowing them to be in control of that particular situation, and that you're paying attention, your attention is on them, you're focused on them. So it can also be quite nice for sort of rebuilding relationships after some difficult times. If there's been a bit of an argument over homeschooling, for example, sitting down and having a nice play together afterwards can be a good way of sort of repairing that. So free play is really important, has lots and lots of benefits for children. Now, one of the difficulties with play and research is trying to evidence the benefits of play, because of course it would be totally unethical to deprive some children of playing and see what happens to them, right? And most children, if they're growing up in any kind of relatively healthy environment, will be playing. So it's really difficult to capture, well, what are the benefits of that? Because all children are doing it. One of the ways that we can do it is by looking at situations where children's play is restricted. For example, if they're in hospital. So if a child has a long-term health condition, and that means that they're in hospital for a long time, or they've had an operation and they have to stay in for a long time afterwards, their play opportunities are obviously quite restricted. So we can look at what happens if we go into hospitals and we play with these children in terms of their stress and their negative emotion. And what that research shows is that play can decrease children's stress and decrease that negative emotion. So there's two examples here of quite well conducted studies showing that when hospitalised children are given time for free play, then their stress decreases, and that children admitted to hospital for treatment show lower levels of anxiety and fewer negative emotions when they take part in a play intervention. So if we know that this happens when children are in hospital, we can assume that it also would happen when children are out of hospital. So play allows children a way of kind of expressing that stress and that negative emotion and reducing it. So in these situations where things are a bit difficult for children, then play should be a priority for supporting them with, you know, managing that stress and negative emotion. So we know that free play in general likely decreases children's stress. We also know that when children spend time outdoors, they have better mental health. So if play is good for mental health and being outdoors is good for mental health, then it follows that play outdoors is even better than play indoors, okay? There's some research here, they showed particularly with girls that being outdoors is beneficial for their mental health. It's probably because girls are more likely to have mental problems in the first place. So there's kind of more space for them to benefit from it, if that makes sense. So play is great, play outdoors is even better. We also know that when we are in natural environments as adults and as children, then our markers of stress decrease. So things like our blood pressure, our heart rate, all go down when we're in nature. And I think probably most of the people who are listening to this can appreciate that. You know, think about a time when you were walking in the woods, or you were, you know, out in big open space and you can see really, really far and you can't see any houses, all you can see is fields and trees. You know, or you can see lakes and mountains. It makes us feel really good, doesn't it? You know, even now, if you take a minute to look out of your window and think, oh, you know, look how pretty the sky looks, or look at the leaves blowing around on the ground, that contact with nature just makes us feel good. Okay, it decreases those stress markers. And the same is true for children. So even looking at pictures of nature decreases our stress, but being in nature is even better. So play is good, outdoor play is good, and play in nature is even better. You know, but I'm conscious, you know, not all children have access to play in nature, particularly at the moment when we're living under these restrictions. So it's important, you know, that that's not the only way of getting benefits, right? Getting outdoors at all is really good, but even if you can't get outdoors, indoor play, if it's free play, will still be beneficial. So there are ways in which play can benefit all children, regardless of kind of what circumstance they're living in and what they have access to. We know when we kind of green play spaces, so when we make them more natural and increase children's exposure to nature in their play spaces, that encourages more complex and diverse ways of playing. It promotes longer duration of play, so children play for longer in natural spaces than in man-made spaces. It increases their physical activity and improves their attention. So what's not to like here. Okay, the other thing that happens, let's think about, sorry, I forgot about this slide. So let's think about why. So what is it that happens when we're in nature that's so beneficial and that makes children feel good? The answer is there's lots and lots of different things that happen, and all of these processes working together give us these big benefits of being in nature. So it's things like most people see nature as unthreatening, so that reduces their stress, compared to looking at Facebook or Twitter, which is full of things that are threatening in one way or another. It can support our attachment to place, or our sense of place, like this is where I belong, I love it here, I feel at home here. It can provide feelings of awe, like look how huge the world is, look how beautiful the world is, think how long these mountains have been here, what's happening with me right now feels tiny, so it can kind of help with that perspective. It meets our need to be around other living things. So we've evolved to be in nature and work with nature. And so when we stop that connection with nature, that's not natural for us. So being in nature is the way that we are designed to be as humans. The air quality is better. And we tend to pay attention to things like the birds singing and the leaves rustling and stuff, instead of paying attention to everything that feels a bit awful and is in our heads. So lots of reasons that being in nature feels good. The other thing that happens when children are in nature is they play in more of an adventurous way. Okay, so they're more, they climb trees, they get muddy, they jump in puddles, they explore things, they lift up, rocks and trees and see what's underneath. And this kind of adventurous play is something that I'm really interested in, where children are kind of playing at the edge of their comfort zone, when it's exciting, thrilling play, when they might experience a level of fear, but they've got that space to take some age-appropriate risks. And just this week, I've published a kind of theoretical paper about this, saying that what we think is that adventurous play can reduce children's risk for anxiety, and it can target lots of those things that we know are risk factors for anxiety, like it can increase children's feelings that they can cope. They've tried some things out and they know that they can cope in a situation, increases their self-efficacy, which is their feeling that they can manage whatever life throws at them. It helps them with handling of uncertainty, because when you're balancing on a log that might be about to either break or fall, or you're going to fall off, you feel uncertain, and in order to learn how to handle that uncertainty, children need the opportunity to experience it. And playing in nature in an adventurous way offers opportunities for children to do that. It also allows them to learn about what we call physiological arousal, which is that, your heart's racing, you've got butterflies in your tummy, your hands are a bit sweaty, you're a bit nervous, you're a bit unsure. And what's important is that children learn that that's a normal response, thing that their body does when they're feeling a bit unsure, and it's not in itself anything to be scared of. So they interpret that realistically, like, oh, that's just because I'm a bit nervous about doing this thing, rather than, oh my goodness, like something wrong with my heart, I'm gonna have a heart attack, it's racing. So it just helps them to have that exposure. So I think adventurous play is particularly important. It can happen indoors, it can happen in man-made spaces, it doesn't have to be in nature, but nature really facilitates that type of play. But it can definitely happen, on playgrounds and other places as well. Okay, so let's have a think now about where we were at before COVID. So there has been concern, of course, that there's been a decline in children's play across the last generation or two. So there's some research showing, this is from America in 2004, so it's quite old now, that 31% of children were reported to play outdoors daily, whereas their parents' generation said 70% of them said that they would play outdoors daily. And in the UK in 2009, a survey showed that 10% of UK children's play was happening in natural spaces, compared to 40% in the previous generation. And I'm sure lots of you have seen examples of reductions in independent mobility as well, which is how far children are allowed to roam and play by themselves, which is getting smaller and smaller across generations. So even before COVID, we were at a point where we were concerned about what was happening with children's play. Some other statistics here, there's, can't actually see the top of my slide, 1.3 million children in the UK in 2015 is estimated spent no time in natural spaces at any point during the year. which is a really shocking figure, I think. And also there's evidence, there's stories in the news fairly regularly as well about schools preventing children from doing things that they deem to be risky. So even things like banning tag. So 5% of schools are estimated to have banned tag because of health and safety concerns. So if children are not getting out into nature and they're not allowed to do anything as risky as playing tag when they're at school, then their opportunities for this type of adventurous play are really limited. So that's where we were at pre-COVID. I do have to say that, lots of organisations, and Play Scotland in particular, have been working really, really hard to combat this. And there's definitely evidence that that's working. So I've collected some data recently across Scotland, Wales and England, which shows that Scottish children are playing more outdoors than children in England and Wales. So well done to all of you, and also well done for how you've handled the pandemic, which seems to be much better than what we've been managing in England so far. So, whilst we had concerns about children's play before the pandemic, for sure, there were, lots of people doing brilliant work to try and combat that. And we need, to keep that going and keep that momentum up. But of course, then COVID happened. Oh, I forgot I was going to say this. I'll come back to that. Yeah, so then COVID happened, and that's sort of changed everything to some extent. So now we need to sort of stop and rethink a little bit about where do we go post that. So March 2020 arrives, parks get closed, children get told they have to stay at home, schools are closed for everybody except for key worker children. And children's lives and all of our lives, of course, have changed dramatically during that time. So one of the concerns that I had almost immediately when they said that schools were going to close was that social media was full of parents, talking about homeschool schedules and how they were going to fill their children's day with all these lessons and what they were going to do. And it really, really concerned me that at that point in time, that was exactly the opposite of what children needed. The pandemic, I think, really sort of sneaked up on all of us, and children in particular, didn't know what was happening, and suddenly they went to school and they were at home and there was a virus and people were dying. And what children needed was opportunity to play, and not for their parents to develop some rigorous schedule for them to keep at home. So this is a chart showing what happened on Google searches for homeschool during that period. So you can see that big peak around the time when schools closed in March. So you can see that's the immediate thing that was on everybody's mind, or the adults who were Googling's mind, was, right, school is now going to be at home, I need to homeschool. And it really concerned me enough that I wrote an article together with my colleague Tim Gill about the fact that that wasn't what children needed, and to support them psychologically and to support their mental health, what they needed was to play. And actually, we also argued at that point that that's what parents needed. Parents were trying to work from home. It was a massive adjustment for them as well. And trying to also home educate was going to lead to this situation where parents are really stressed and children are really stressed and no one's learning anything. And actually, let's just let them have opportunity to play freely. We already talked about the benefits of that. So that was kind of, I think this came out sort of a week after lockdown started, but we, almost immediately I wanted to get that message out that children need to play, let's give them a break. It was also backed up, this is Professor Paul Ramchandani, who's the Lego Professor of Play at Cambridge. He also did an article in The Guardian saying very, very similar things, like, let's let them play, okay? So what happens during lockdown, the first lockdown, this is research from, what happens to children's play? So this is some research from the University of Limerick in Ireland. And what they found was increases in screen time, but also increases in outdoor play. So obviously, children were not in school, and we were blessed with lovely weather last spring, weren't we? So what actually happened was lots of children were playing outdoors and probably having much more free play time than they might normally have. But what's really important to remember is that this is not consistent across all children, okay? So children who are growing up in neighbourhoods where they can go out and play on their streets, or they've got a lovely big garden to play in, fantastic, they've got lots of access to that space. But lots of other children didn't have access to that space. They are in flats or apartments without outdoor space, in areas where it's not safe to be playing outdoors. So whilst on average children might have been playing more, we need to remember that for some children that definitely wasn't the case. The other thing that's really important to remember is that whilst they might be playing more, none of them were playing with their friends. You know, their social interactions were restricted. So children who were only children were playing by themselves. Children with siblings could play with those siblings. And I think there's really interesting stuff about what's happened to siblings' relationships during that time. But none of them were getting to play with their friends. And peer play is really, really important. Because so this picture on the right here, these are my two children. They played together. That's all good. I'm really, really pleased they had each other. But when they play with their peers might say, I don't want to play that. Or they might get cross with them. And so there's a kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? A sort of learning that happens in that peer interaction. Whereas with siblings, they kind of don't have a choice. They have to play with one another. You know, and there is a power differential. One of them is older than the other one of them's, you know, more capable than the other one, etc., which doesn't happen in peer relationships. Peer relationships are equal, and so they have to be negotiated. And so children really, really are missing out when they're not having an opportunity to play with their peers. This report from the University of Limerick also showed that 1 in 3 children brought the virus or some restrictions related to the virus into their play. Which I saw in my own children. So these are pictures that I took when they developed this Splat the Virus game that they did on the pavement outside. And some of you might have seen that was covered in the Sunday Times in December. They like recreated it for the cover image, which was fantastic to see. So I've been working more recently on trying to kind of create a sort of digital archive of these play experiences and these unique ways that children have been playing during the pandemic. So this is the advert for the archive, and anybody can submit to it. The address is pandemicplay.live/Merle, which I can put in the chat in a little while. But if you're working with parents or you yourself are working with children, or your teachers who are working with children, anybody can write in a description of the play that they've observed or contribute photos. And the idea is that often historically children's experiences during events get lost because they don't write down what happened. And so, you know, adults will write books and will write poems and will write songs, and they will last. And so in 100 years or 200 years, you know, people will be able to learn about this time via adult voices. But it's so rare that children's perspectives on that are captured. So I'm working with the Museum of English Oral Life to try and kind of create this archive, which we can keep as part of the historical record about what happened to children's play. And I thought you might like it to see some of the examples from that. I think it's fascinating. I love getting submissions to it. So these are some that have been submitted so far. The one on the left here are toys that have all been socially distanced. So I think they're animals, but the child has set them all up and said they have to be socially distanced from one another. There's a doll here. This was submitted by an early years educator who noticed that the children were putting tape over the dolls. So this, I think, is for their temperature, and then this is supposed to be a face mask at the bottom. And then the 2 pictures on the right were submitted by a family, and they were saying that on a Sunday, what they normally do is they drive to swimming lessons. They have their swimming lessons, and then they get a drive-through Costa on the way home. And so their children decided, because they couldn't do that, they should recreate it at home. So you can see in the first picture, this is them driving to their swimming lessons. And in the second picture, they're lying down on the chairs in their living room doing their swimming. And then there were some other pictures of them going to Costa afterwards, and their mum gave them, you know, a cup of milk and a chocolate biscuit or something each. And I just think that that's lovely. Like, you know, it makes us feel good when we can stick to our normal routines, right? We know that. And when things are taken away from us, we want things to resemble normality as much as possible. And these children kind of instinctively knew that. They knew that that's what they needed to do. And so they created their normal routine as much as they possibly could without leaving the house. And I just think it's incredible that children know that. You know, they know that that's what they need, and they just do it, and they do it in a playful way. But if these children weren't being allowed to play freely, they wouldn't have had opportunity to create this, to recreate this experience. So yeah, so it's fascinating getting submissions to that. And I think it's a wonderful example of how children use play to work out what's going on and how they use it to express themselves. I'm also working on a study called Coast-Based Study with the University of Oxford, which is about supporting parents, adolescents and children during the pandemic. And what we've been doing is working with a big group of parents and asking them every month to report on how their children are doing, how they're doing, and tell us some things about what they've been up to. And one of the results from that showed us, we asked about parents having ideas of how to play with their children. And what we found was that parents who said they had lots of ideas about different ways to play with their child were also more likely to feel that they could keep their child occupied. They were less worried about whether they were doing enough for their child, and they found keeping their child occupied less stressful. So you can see these benefits as well for parents who feel kind of empowered to support their child's play, that it's easier for them to keep their child occupied. They're less worried, they're less stressed. So that supports that, this idea that I was saying originally, that what we need children to be allowed to do is to play freely rather than their parents structuring the entire day, which is just stressful for everybody. Okay, so in some ways, there's some positive play stories, I think, in relation to the pandemic. Those examples I gave, I think, really demonstrate how children intuitively use play to work out what's going on around them, to make sense of things, to support their own understanding. But also, of course, mental health isn't looking great, and we need to think about how these things relate to one another. So there's a study about the children's mental health. I think it's in England rather than across Great Britain, but I would imagine that the results will be very similar for Scotland. And there's a study that happens normally, I think it's about every 5 to 7 years. And what they decided to do was to do a follow-up in July in 2020, which they wouldn't normally have had scheduled, to see what's happened to children's mental health. So it's done every 5 to 7 years, so we can track the prevalence rates of mental health. And pre-COVID, it's worth saying that they were already getting worse. So before we went into COVID, it was about 1 in 10 children had a mental health problem. So in July 2020, they followed up they did another assessment across England. And what they found then was that 1 in 6 5 to 16-year-olds had what they call a probable mental health problem, because it's based on a cutoff score rather than a diagnosis, which is a 50% increase since 2017, which is really, really concerning statistics. Okay. One thing that I think is quite important to note is that in the coast-based study that I've been working on, you can also see here with the purple line, in particular primary school children, the mental health problems go up, and they peak somewhere around July. But as schools have reopened, actually those mental health problems have come down. So whilst it is really worrying that in July 1 in 6 children met probable criteria for a mental health problem, it does seem that at least in some of them it's temporary, and getting back into school and back with their friends meant that their mental health improved. Of course, we're now back in lockdown, which is really worrying, because what we would expect to see is that this line is going back up. Okay. And going back to that data from England, is 1 in 6 children. Children with a probable mental health disorder were twice as likely to have not exercised outdoors at all during the previous week. So the kids who've exercised outdoors are much less likely to have a mental health problem than those who've been indoors all of that time. And of course, for children, what are they doing when they're exercising outdoors? They're playing, right? So it's opportunity to play outdoors, to run around, to climb things, to jump on things, etc. So that really supports this idea that children need to be playing, they need to be outdoors, they need to be active in order to support their mental health, now more than ever, but it is true always. Some research that I've done shows that when children are not playing at home, playgrounds are the most common place for them to be playing. And so it's really important that playgrounds remain open so that children have got those spaces to go to. But of course, as we already talked about, play in nature and play in open spaces is also really important and has more benefits probably than playing in playgrounds for their mental health. So mental health isn't looking great, but the good news is when they go back to school, lots of them just get better. And by being outdoors and by encouraging play, we can help children with their mental health. This is a quote that I saw this week. It was a comment on a Newsround article about playgrounds being closed in England, from a child who said, "I think it's rather sad that playgrounds are shut because it can give me a chance to breathe." And I just think that's so powerful, that child's voice, that is what play is to them. It's an opportunity to breathe, right? To have space, to have a moment, to catch a breath, to feel free, to not be under that kind of constant homeschool pressure, stuck in the house. And we all know that feeling, right? When we're somewhere where we finally feel that we can breathe. And so I do think it's really, really important that we remember that play spaces have this power for children. Even if they don't feel that important to us, they're really, really important to children. So thinking about now and moving forward, as we hopefully come out of lockdown and we start to think about a post-COVID world, what can we do? We can give children time and space to play freely. I think, as Margaret said earlier, I was involved in the Play First UK campaign, and what we really wanted to do then was to try and support schools to have the space to allow children to play, to reconnect socially, to work out what on earth has just been going on before lots of academic pressure is put on them. Let them play and learn outdoors. So being outdoors is great for kids. So why not move some of the learning outdoors as well, but definitely let them play outdoors and encourage and support that play outdoors wherever we can. If there's access to green or natural space, if you have it as a family, if you have it as an organisation, if you have it as a school, use it. And also giving children that space to explore and take those age-appropriate risks as part of their development is giving them opportunity to explore risk-taking, to work out what uncertainty feels like, to work out what it feels like when their heart is racing. Lots of them haven't had the opportunity to do that because they've been stuck at home. So even more than ever, they need that opportunity to play and explore and take risks and kind of recalibrate almost that kind of risk radar, I guess. And something just to finish off that I think is really, really important is that we drop any message that puts any blame on children. So I was doing a radio interview the other day and the DJ said to me, why are children behind when they're starting school? And it just made me really angry because I was like, the children aren't behind, the children are wherever they are. It's not their fault. Of all the people who are to blame for whatever situation we're in right now, it's definitely not the children who are starting school's fault. What they need is adults who can appreciate what they've been through, that they may not be able to read or identify their letters or put their coats on quite as well as children who started school 2 years ago, but it's not their fault and they will learn those things. They just need to be given the time and space to do it. And if we start putting, assessments in and pushing teachers to make sure children have caught up, it puts all the blame and all the emphasis on the child to do all of that work. And that's not fair. It's not their fault. Let them play. They need the space. Let's just take some of that pressure off. And they will get there. They will, but not if we put loads of pressure on them. All we're going to do then is damage their mental health, which isn't going to be good for anybody in the long run. So thank you very much for listening. And thanks for inviting me again. My Twitter's at @Helen Dodd. You can find me on there, or you can email me. I'm happy to take some questions now.